Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Should You Play, where I show you some spoiler-free gameplay and give you my thoughts after playing new games for a few hours, while also highlighting and checking out at least one of the PlayStation Plus games for each month. In this video I'm playing one of the May 2025 PlayStation Plus games, Warhammer 40k Boltgun, the first-person boomer shooter that takes inspiration from classic 90s shooters and originally released in 2023. I've never actually played any of the other Warhammer games before, and I know that Boltgun is a very different game from the rest, but I have played Quake in the original Doom game, so I pretty much knew what I'd be walking into with this one. For the most part, Boltgun does the boomer shooter genre well, but there's also a good amount of issues to talk about too, so let's just get straight into things.
Glory to mankind!
The story in Boltgun takes place a few years after the events of Warhammer 40k Space Marine, but it's not a direct sequel, so you don't need to have played it or any of the other games to understand what's going on. You play as an armored soldier sent to investigate a growing threat, which mostly just translates to ripping through wave after wave of corrupted enemies with your chainsword and other weapons. To put the plot in simple terms, Space Marine good, Chaos Space Marines and Demons bad, and if you've ever played a shooter with the same kind of energy as this one before, you already know that the story isn't really the point of the game. In the same way that people didn't need to know the exact lore behind Doom and the portals on Mars's moons, Boltgun doesn't require you to be up to date on the world of Warhammer. It's mostly just there to justify the carnage, and that's perfectly fine.
Suffer not the heretic to live.
Boltgun is a boomer shooter through and through though. The action is fast, the movement is quick, the combat is punchy, and there's a big emphasis on exploring maze-like maps and collecting secrets and color-coded keycards to progress. There are two game modes currently in the game, the main story mode and a horde mode where you fight wave after wave of enemies. Between the two modes, there are 4 difficulty levels, ranging from low to exterminatus, and honestly, unless you're a veteran player or really good with games like this, I recommend starting off on the lowest difficulty, because things can ramp up fast.
You should assume the situation to be extremely hostile.
I started playing on the hard difficulty, and the first few levels were a breeze, but by the time I got to the 4th level, I was getting overwhelmed on a regular basis and had to bring it down to medium to avoid having to replay long sections over and over again. If you truly are struggling and just want to get through things though, there's always the option to go into the accessibility menu and turn on some cheats like infinite ammo or invincibility so you can force your way through the mayhem. Aside from the poor difficulty curve, the level design is probably the weakest part of the game. The maps often feel confusing without enough direction, and it's easy to find yourself backtracking because you might have missed a switch or pathway somewhere along the way. The game does have a waypoint system, and maybe this is my fault on this one, but I found it by accident while looking for another button, and it still doesn't change the fact that a lot of levels tend to look really similar as you continue playing through the campaign. There are also some hidden collectibles scattered throughout the levels, but aside from some temporary buffs, they don't unlock anything meaningful unless you're trying to 100% the game. Even though the difficulty ramp is a bit of an issue, Boltgun is at its best when you're in the middle of a firefight. Everything about it feels powerful and weighty, especially when you're launching yourself across the battlefield with your chainsword in one hand and a shotgun in the other. You earn new weapons as you continue playing, starting off with just the chainsword at first, and then getting the Boltgun a little while later, and every weapon has its strengths and weaknesses, but they're all incredibly powerful. One small issue I have with the combat itself is that you're not able to shoot through cover, even when you're behind barriers that look like they were specifically designed for you to do so. I'm also not the biggest fan of how the health system is displayed, with your health and shields just being simple numbers in the lower left corner rather than being a meter or gauge, but it's not something I feel too strongly about. Enemies can come at you alone, in groups, or full-on waves, and things can spiral into chaos fast. There aren't a ton of enemy types, but there are enough to keep things interesting, especially when you're just blasting them at point-blank range in the face. It is worth noting, though, that these aren't the smartest enemies you'll ever face in a game. It seems like they pretty much just lock onto you on sight, even if that means their plan is to group up against a wall when you're hiding, or walk straight off a cliff when there's a gap between you. You're also able to taunt enemies within the game, but it doesn't appear to have any in-game effect aside from making you seem like a bit more of a badass.
I am cleansed in the blood of my enemies.
Boltgun's presentation is something that they've managed to do in a really satisfying way. I've already talked about how some of the level designs are less than clear, but the actual art style and pixel sprites are really well designed, and the absolute devastation that's left across the battlefield when you wrap up a fight is incredibly bloody. It can be a little jarring to see 2D models rotating in a 3D space at first, but you get used to it pretty quickly, and if you're looking for something even more retro looking or want it to look a bit sharper, you can also adjust the strength of the pixelation in the settings. Certain things like exploding barrels and some other environmental effects don't hold up compared to more realistic looking titles, but the style is intentional, and for better or worse, that's how a lot of older effects looked. The music and sound design also pull their weight. Every weapon sounds impactful, the chainsword delivers a satisfying crunch, and the soundtrack ramps up alongside the action without ever stealing the spotlight or becoming distracting. The game also performs pretty well, especially considering how many particles and effects are flying around the screen at any given time. Respawns and load times between levels are both fast, which is great for keeping the action moving, and thanks to the retro pixel art design, it's pretty difficult to tell if anything is actually glitching out or not because it already looks so old school by design. That said, I did run into one notable bug a few times, and that was when enemies stopped spawning in an area that required me to clear them out to proceed. I'd scour the entire area multiple times, unable to find any enemies, restart from the last autosave, and still not find anything, so I'd end up being forced to restart the entire level from the beginning. This happened to me on 3 different occasions, and I don't know if I consider it game-breaking by definition, but at the very least, it was really annoying to deal with. Warhammer 40k Boltgun is a fun game. It's not super deep, and it's definitely not breaking any new ground on the genre, but if you're in the mood for a fast-paced old-school shooter that feels like it came straight out of the 90s, this is a solid pick.
I will purge them for the Imperium!
The level designs can be frustrating, there are some rough edges around the game design itself, and the enemies aren't the smartest, but the combat is satisfying and the tone is exactly what you'd want out of a modern-day boomer shooter. A single playthrough will last about 8 to 12 hours depending on how much you decide to explore each level, and honestly, it's about the exact length I'd be comfortable playing. Boltgun knows exactly what type of game it wants to be, and even if I wasn't completely blown away by it, I do think it's worth giving it a shot if you get the chance to play it.
Nothing, once touched by the hand of chaos, remains untainted.
As always though, this is just my opinion. Whether you're just starting to hunt down Chaos Space Marines, or you've already managed to hold back the looming threat, let me know in the comments what you think of Warhammer 40k Boltgun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.